Hi everybody, may I, on behalf of the entire team, wish you all a very happy new year. A bit belatedly, but we wish you all a very happy new year and hope that you'll be in good health and have a very good 2018. Okay, now I'm going to talk to you today about Atlantis and Lemuria. But before I start, may I just, you'll see on the screen behind me these books that we've got. And I thought I'd show you the actual books. There's one there, the very first one we came up with. Okay. And here is the second one. And they're actually very well printed and produced and well worth buying. They're not very expensive. We live in France, so we use euros, but we paid just over €5 for each of these, plus postage and packing and so on. But they're not very expensive at all. And if you're interested in what we talk about, they're worth getting hold of, okay? So it's up to you. Now, let's get on with this. Atlantis. Let me get the bits of paper together. Right. Yeah, we'll deal with Atlantis first and go on to Lemuria afterwards. Atlantis is rather misnamed because it gives the impression that it was limited to one small island, the provenance of which has been hotly discussed. By that, it means people question where the actual island of Atlantis was. Now, the main island that we know as Atlantis has long since disappeared under the waves. But the problem is that every time there is an Earth shift, the planet alters in shape somewhat and land masses rise and fall, causing a total reforming of the planet. So the original island that was the home base of Atlantis is now under the sea. The closest landmass existing today being Portugal in the Atlantic Ocean. Of course, the shape of the planet was much different before the extermination level event that provoked the destruction of Atlantis. As we have stated in a previous message, this is the Great White Brotherhood, it is difficult to speak just of an island, giving the impression that Atlantis was limited to one small landmass and thus ignoring the rest of the world, because not only were there large land masses, much as there are now, but at its height, Atlantean civilization had spread to many of these land masses, and operations of various sorts were carried out on these land masses closely or distantly connected to the main island. We have the impression today, that most of what went on was of a scientific nature. This was not so. Although experiments and projects answering that description were predominant in certain areas, by far the main activities on a day-to-day basis were much as are carried out today, providing food, clothing, housing, and the 1,000,001 tasks that occupy people's minds today. The people resembled humans today and lived in houses, huts, and very much the sorts of constructions that exist today. Clothing tended to be robes in warm areas, but in colder climes, people made use of whatever they could manufacture or scavenge from nature to protect them from the cold. Building materials tended to be of stone on the main island of Atlantis, as the natural trees had long been felled to make room for buildings, as the island was not very large and a huge number of people lived there. The technology was, in fact, much like what would be available today on Earth if the hidden advanced technologies would be released into the public domain. These technologies were spread far and wide over the planet. They'll to sort of mention what these technologies are a little bit, I think, later on. Anyway, of course, there were rural and forest areas, much like there are today, where people lived very simply, and there were also urban areas where advanced machinery for heating and lighting was available. There was also extensive use made of flying machines using anti-gravity techniques. This could be available on Earth today if these techniques were not reserved just for military use. So I think what they're implying there is that they had 0-point energy and could they had made available some very advanced stuff that we can only dream about, that in fact is already known about here on Earth, but is kept in reserve for other people to use and not us. Religion was not widely followed in the sense that it is today, but there was respect for the prime creator that we call God. We wish to present a picture of a civilization that was not very dissimilar to that which could be available on Earth today if it was not for the jealously guarded secrets by what you refer to as the industrial military complex. The main island that you refer to as Atlantis was very modern and made use to a certain degree of crystals to produce energy, but nowhere near the degree that modern myths suggest. It was realized by the Atlantean population that crystals can be rather unpredictable in their effects, their powers raising into the astral and etheric realms, and thus affecting people far beyond the hoped-for power, which was largely just for practical and communication reasons. Now, I'll just break off there to say, I think people, even today, should be careful with crystals because we don't always know what their sort of side effects might be. Personally, I don't use crystals at all. I'm a bit worried about them. Anyway, let's go on. The period of time that the Atlantean civilization existed was several hundreds of thousands of years before it was halted in its tracks by the elimination level event that we mentioned earlier. These ELEs smite the planet Earth from time to time and has wiped out advanced civilizations on a regular basis, each time forcing the surviving populations and the people introduced by the directors of life to reset the clock and start from virtually cavemen again. Modern people are interested in contact with interdimensional beings, so we will say that some contact with what you refer to as alien groups did happen, but as the system of government was much more open and honest, contact with the greys, you know, the little fellas, the typical ETs that you sometimes see, was kept to a minimum as opposed to what is happening on Earth today. Because at least I believe the American government are working regularly with these little grey aliens, and they're not really to be trusted. Anyway, as opposed to what's happening today. And the alien visitors were carefully vetted to discover their true intentions before being allowed to interact with the Atlantean civilization. That implies, of course, that there's quite a large number of different alien groups which the Great White Brotherhood imply are, what did they say, interdimensional beings. Okay. Now, For those curious concerning communication, we will say that telepathy was widely used, but they did have a language that Sanskrit is now based on. This does not imply that the written language was like written Sanskrit today, nor was the pronunciation like the way that Sanskrit is spoken today. So, we repeat, Atlantis was an island that gave its name to a civilization that spread over much of the planet Earth, and although planet Earth has been greatly altered by the elimination level events that destroyed both Atlantis and virtually all of its population. Thus, it would be pointless in trying to describe the geography of the Atlantean sovereignty, because much of where people lived then is underwater today. And that's what they said about Atlantis. Now, let's go on and have a quick look at Lemuria. Often the names Atlantis and Lemuria are linked. Oh, it mentions it here. The names Atlantis and Lemuria are often linked as if one was the opposite of the other. We are presented with an image where only two forces existed, Atlantis and Lemuria. This was not the case at all. The world is huge, as large then as it is now, so that there were many continents, many civilizations, and many groups of people, just as there are today. We are also presented with a picture of two civilizations vastly superior to us today, with mysterious physics at their command. This picture is largely false. Just as there are, possibly, two major forces in the world today, America and Russia, there are also a number of important countries, China, India, Pakistan, Europe, to name just a few. It was the same then. Although history has retained only the two main ones, Atlantis and Lemuria, there were nevertheless a large number of continents and people that lived outside of the control of these two that history has recorded. Some of these other people were fairly advanced, and some were fairly primitive, just as they are today. To return to Lemuria, like most of the Earth's population, the people in the continent of Lemuria was decimated by the same elimination level event that destroyed Atlantis. I'll get my head around that because it's written as ELE each time and I have to sort of think about it. The original home base of Lemuria was where Java is today, roughly, but has moved as the planet Earth spun as a result of the ELE, elimination level event. It would be off the shores of Australia today, but is far underwater. The people of Lemuria were of about the same level of advancement as those of Atlantis, and, like the Atlanteans, had spread their interests beyond their shores and into other countries. But it would be wrong to suggest that the civilized world was divided just between Atlantis and Lemuria. There were a large number of different civilizations. They spoke a different language to the Atlanteans, a language that does not have a comparison today. They had developed space travel, and in many ways we can compare the two civilizations. A parallel today would be to compare America and Russia, which, although vastly different in customs and language, history will be put in the same box. History will be put in the same box as regards technological development, which means that from a technical point of view, America and Russia are about the same level. Okay. We must move to the incident that caused the ELE that destroyed much of the planet Earth at that time and most of its population. It has been suggested that a huge hole was dug in the ground in an attempt to release heat. This is not true, as the Lemurians would have realized the danger of suddenly releasing pent-up energy in such an uncontrolled fashion. The truth is that a satellite from outer space, by which they mean a lump of rock, not the sort of satellites that give signals, but a lump of rock. Where are we? The truth is that a satellite from outer space crashed into the Earth in the region of mainland Lemuria and caused a vast volcanic eruption because Lemuria was built in an area where there was an underground volcano, much like Yellowstone Park today. If you imagine a huge lump of rock from outer space travelling at enormous speeds, suddenly smashing into Yellowstone Park, well, that's what happened to Lemuria and to the whole world at that time. The combined result of the impact of the satellite, followed by a huge volcanic eruption, was enough to provoke an extermination level event. I'll get it right one of these days. So all life was eliminated, Atlantis and Lemuria included. In the interests of completing the picture, we must say that the similarities between the underground volcano at Yellowstone Park and that in Lemuria are such that we can compare the two. The difference being that the people of Lemuria exploited the thermals that emitted from deep underground to provide heating and an endless supply of hot water for various uses. So they did drill into these thermal areas to tap the clean, boiling water below. It may be that remote viewers investigating the demise of Atlantis and Lemuria saw in their mind's eye these drilling constructions and put two and two together and presumed that it was that the Lemurians dug too deep and provoked a catastrophe. This is understandable, but is not the truth. It was a satellite crashing into the underground volcano that provoked the demise of all life at that time. And that's all I got. Okay, so make of this what you will. I hope you found it interesting, and you either believe it or you don't. But the Great White Brotherhood gave it to me, and I've given it to you. Now, any questions, as usual, please ask. And I thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll come back another day on a different topic. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.